Hey everyone, how y'all doing? So I'm gonna carry on with my Hopium, my Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Copium, because right now I've been sniffing not just copium, but also sniffing a good chunk of hopium onto my system. So, before I say anything in this video, I just want to make it clear that a lot of what I'm going to say is being told from the perspective of, hey, let's imagine this scenario type shit. Because at the end of the day, I do not necessarily believe that we are going to get new Storm content because, truth be told, there's just not really strong evidence to suggest that. Like right now, we are really just again, like I said before, I am just sniffing the hopium. It doesn't really extend beyond that. Like if you were to ask me to share my own genuine opinion as far as what I think is gonna happen, I'm gonna say that we're probably not gonna get anything, at least solely based on empirical data. However, with that said, I still just want to speculate just because, I might as well. Because why the fuck not? Now, one thing I will state though is that in the past, whenever I shared my own assessments as far as whether or not I think certain things will happen, certain things won't happen, I will usually base on leaks. Now, I'm not gonna use leaks this time, even though in the past it definitely did help me. I remember back in 2022 or late 2021. I think it might have been early 2022. I remember back then when I was I believe that there is a possibility that the now actually let me see if I can even find those videos. New Naruto game coming. This was back when I was sniffing the initial hopium, because prior to that, I wasn't really sharing my many thoughts as far as whether or not I think a new storm is gonna happen. But this was back when I was starting to really sniff the fucking hopium. And yeah, back then I vaguely remember that I was mentioning people like Senju in Japan or stuff like that. The same is true for um in fact, this was something that at the time I was one of the few people who was actually believing this. But there was a time when some accounts were leaking. Well, no, it wasn't just. It was one in specific. It was one account that was leaking the possibility of the Hunter x Hunter game, and nobody was believing that at the time. But I did believe so because I did have reason to believe that there might actually be something of that nature. And again, I was also partially basing on people like Senju in Japan, who was dropping hints over the years. However, in this instance, I'm not really gonna do that because I don't think he's leaking anything anymore. I don't know if he still has contacts with people in CC2 or other studios, and so this right here, this video that I'm making right now, is going to entirely be based on speculation, no leaks, nothing like that. It's just me theorizing. And even then, if you were to ask me to give my own firm take, I would say there's no evidence that anything's gonna happen. But regardless, so now that I got all of that out of the way, let's just briefly talk about what's been happening. So I do want to address a little bit of skepticism. So for starters, let's just bring up the whole reason for why there's even speculation in the first place, which has to do with the redesign of the logo. So obviously, redesigning the logo in and of itself doesn't really mean a whole lot, because even if, let's say for the sake of argument, even if they were planning to release a new game or an expansion, which would, at least in my opinion, be the two best scenarios, those things in and of itself wouldn't really explain why they would design a new logo. And that's why I do still hold on to the idea that perhaps they just wanted to make design a universal logo for representing the series, which I think this is essentially what it is. But even if we were to look at it from that perspective, that is still concentrated work, concentrated effort that people, whether it's Shueisha, Bandai Namco, everyone involved, went out of their way to design this. Which, no matter how you want to view this, it's odd. It's an odd thing. In the past, whenever there were redesigns of the logos, it was usually because there was just a new release, whether it was like this is a good example. This image is a wait, what? Really? I can't open the page in another tab. I have to download. That's fucking bullshit. But you know what? Fine. Like, if you look at the history of the Storm logo, it doesn't include Generations of Revolution, but obviously they were different slightly. Like, at the end of the day, whenever there was like a redesign of the logo, it was because they were releasing something new. Like, they were releasing either the Legacy Bundle or the Trilogy or a new entry in the Storm series. Like, that was usually the reason for why they were redesigning the logo. But in this case in specific, they're redesigning the logo, at least from what we can tell, based because just simply due to the fact that they want to design a logo to represent the series as a whole. And while that's fine, that's a fine explanation, at the end of the day, it is still odd that they would choose to do this now. Like, remember back when they released this article talking about the sales milestones, and there was this drawing by Kishimoto, like the drawing, and they even promoted their catalog. But even when you look at this image, like, there was no universal logo. There was no logo redesign to represent the lineup, even though this would have been a great opportunity for them to promote their older games. Like, honestly, this in my opinion would be an even better opportunity for them to design like a new logo to represent the series lineup, because they can now advertise that in reference to the fact that, hey, they've made a lot of money selling this, and that would have been a better opportunity. But like, why now? Why would they do this now? Because at the end of the day, designing a new logo requires them to allocate some of their budget to the marketing team, the marketing advertisement team, because they have to pay an artist to design a new logo, and then they have to declare that to their taxes. Like, this is work. Like, this is work. This is an expenditure. This is an expense that they're making by doing this. And so, while it's not impossible to just explain this off by them just wanting to make a new logo for the series lineup, while that's a fine explanation, it is certainly suspicious for why they would do that now. Because if, for example, if we look at like the past tweet history, the only explanation we have is that maybe they were just promoting the fact that this was like the 11th anniversary of the finale of the series. But even then, like, they couldn't have done this last year when it was like the 10th anniversary. And then they released this tweet saying, hey, you can catch up to the whole series by playing the Storm series. It's like, really? If you want to promote the 11th anniversary of the finale of the manga, wouldn't you want to promote the manga volumes? I don't know. Like, this to me, it feels like this to me feels like they're tagging in this series. And again, that's not a bad explanation, but it is one of those things where it's like, you can't help but wonder if there might be some ulterior motive, if that makes any sense. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, you can't help but suspect that maybe there might be some ulterior motive. Now, granted, do I think the game's gonna get announced today during like the state of play? Storm Connections, I believe, was previously announced in state of play, but at the end of the day, we've been baited in the past. We thought that back when we were talking about like Connections, like, we thought that the game would get announced during Jump Festas, or we would see more information on certain state of plays and stuff like that, or the Game Awards, and usually nothing would happen. And so I certainly don't want to get your hopes up as far as that. I think it's worth paying attention to, but don't come into this with the expectation that you're going to see anything, because at the end of the day, it's very hard to confirm anything. Like, even if Bandai Namco and CyberConnect 2 were planning to release something, it's very hard to tell when they're going to announce anything, because you can be planning something, but like, as far as like when they'll decide to advertise it or reveal it to the public, that could be something that's decided based on multiple factors that are just outside of our field of understanding. And so there's no real point trying to like speculate as far as whether that's going to get announced today. To me, this is more so me giving an opportunity to speculate on the idea of them having to release newer Storm content. And to be honest with you, I don't think that that's like too unlikely, because even if we look at the history of Storm 4, which, granted, Storm 4, I believe, was much more successful than Storm Connections, but like, even Storm 4, like that game spent like what 4 years before it released new content. Like they released the fucking Road to Boruto expansion, and then like only in 2020 did they release like the DLC for like Momoshiki and Kinshiki, and so it's not like it's unlikely for them to just be completely off the grid and then suddenly decide to release new content if they think it's a good opportunity. And so I don't think that's like too unlikely. The only question is what content would they release. That's not something that we be able to predict. That's where the speculation comes in, like because I have no idea if they would, for example, go as far as to release a new game. I think that's the most exciting possibility, but even I'm not gonna go as far as to like entertain that super heavily, even though it's what I would personally want. Now, let's dive into a little bit more into the skepticism, because obviously people right now, in fact for a very long time, they've been wondering, are we ever going to get like a season 2 of Storm Connections? And there is a little bit of skepticism when it comes to that, because firstly, some time has passed since we got season 1. In fact, it might have even been more than a year, and usually when it comes to like seasons, we tend to expect like, once a year or something similar to that. And so the fact that we haven't heard anything and we're already reaching the end of 2025, it is definitely something where it's like, it's becoming more and more unlikely that we're going to get a season 2. And I definitely do understand that 100%. And so I've also seen some people like, talking about the fact that, why would we ever expect a season 2 when the game doesn't even really have like a huge player base right now? And so it seems kind of seems kind of ridiculous to expect that. And my response to that is, in general, I don't think it necessarily means a whole lot whether or not the game has like a huge player base or not, because at the end of the day, whether or not Bandai Namco decides that it's a good idea to release more content is not just solely going to be based on whether or not it has a good player base, because if that were the only criteria, then this game, Shinobi Striker, wouldn't be receiving new DLC like every single like every once in a while. Like they're to this day they're still releasing character DLCs. Now, of course, Shinobi Striker is a different type of game. It is definitely much more leaning towards like the live service model, and so they made this game, they designed it with the expectation that they were going to release character DLCs throughout years. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if many of the character DLCs we're seeing right now were already prepared years in advance, because that's just the model of these types of games. Additionally, it is also worth noting that like Shinobi Striker technically does have larger player base than not just Connections but even Storm 4. Like generally speaking, again, it is the nature of live service games, but like, it does technically have like a more, actually no, in this case it doesn't have, I didn't even notice that. Actually in this case it doesn't have a it doesn't have a higher player base. But yeah, like at the end of the day, I don't think we should use player base as like a criteria for determining whether or not we're gonna get more content, because especially with the Storm series, like these types of fighting games, like Storm 4, for example. I've known I've been paying attention to the Storm series for a very long time. And one thing I can tell you right now is that Storm 4, which is like the latest one, has never really had like a massive player base. Like whether it's on PC or PlayStation, like it's always been like a pretty niche one. It's always been like a pretty niche game as far as like active players. And yet, despite that, this game not only is it one of the most successful anime games of all time, it's one of the most successful fighting games of all time. Despite the fact that many games that probably sold more or made less money than this have like higher player bases. And so at the end of the day, I don't think player base is something that we should like take super seriously, because at the end of the day, like obviously Bandai Namco can find more ways to make money that doesn't solely involve like having like thousands of players active on the game, because especially like with Storm, with Storm in general, like they were primarily making their money through selling the game, as in selling the base game, and then selling all of the expansions and DLCs and stuff like that. That's how they mainly make money. They don't necessarily make money through having a lot of players in and of itself. That alone doesn't actually make them money. In fact, if anything, you might even be able to argue that it costs them to have like a massive amount of people, because they have to then they have to like upgrade their online infrastructures, which could cost some money depending on how many people they have overloading the servers. I'm not gonna talk too much about that because that's like outside of my scope of. Honestly, it's outside of a lot of our scopes, and even then, like a lot of these companies, they can probably justify those because whenever they're reporting to investors and all that stuff, they can probably say, "Hey, we have these amount of people playing this. Isn't that attractive?" And then they could probably convince their investors to give them a lot of money. And so I'm not gonna dwell too much on this. But the point is, like Bandai Namco, they have ways to make money even if they don't have an active player base. If they, for example, tomorrow announce that they're going to release like a fucking expansion containing like Boruto material, and they like release like this super hype trailer, you don't think people are gonna spend money on that? Like, it doesn't matter if they play the expansion and then only played it for like 2 days and dip. Like, that's money that they've already sold to those people. And so they can definitely make money even if they don't have an active player base. And the other thing is, we don't really know how much money Storm Connections actually made, because I don't, as far as like I'm aware, I've been like, ever since the game released, I've been looking into articles that report like sales numbers, and I've never really been able to find that. Like, if someone is able to find that, please let me know. And just to be clear, again, I'm not talking about the active player base. I'm talking about the number of copies sold, how much money it made. I've never really been able to find articles about that. I've tried looking up multiple times. I just never really been able to find it. We do, however, know that the series as a whole has sold more than 30 million copies. And this to me makes me believe two things. For starters, I don't think Connections has like a ton of, like, I don't think it has like an attractive sales number, because if they had, they probably would have reported that in some ways. Like, we would have probably seen like an article highlighting that. So the fact that we haven't seen that yet does make me believe that maybe the numbers weren't really that attractive. And the other thing is, if Bandai Namco wanted to justify releasing more Storm content, they would not use the sales figure for Storm Connections. Instead, they would use this. This would be the reference for releasing new Storm content. The fact that the series as a whole has made this amount of money. And so let's make one thing clear. If they want to justify releasing new Storm content, they absolutely can. This is at the end of the day, Storm, regardless of Storm Connections was a failure or not, this series as a whole is extremely successful. They can 100% justify releasing new content. Now, again, does that mean I think they will? I don't know. But they definitely can. They definitely can justify that. Like, I can guarantee you that. But yeah, beyond that, I guess another thing I also wanted to note is, in the past, Hiroshi Matsuyama did say that Storm Connections would be the last Storm game, but that they would continue to update. So obviously, I don't know if I trust those words all that much, because he also said that Storm 4 would be the last Storm game, but obviously that ended up not being the case. Clearly, these companies, they can change their mind if they want to. I do, however, I do still want to maybe focus a little bit more on the statement that they would continue to support this game, which makes me believe that at the very least, maybe we might be able to see expansion content or something like that. I'm not sure about that. The other thing is I want to get back to the topic I brought up before, which is in regards to the timing of the announcement. So basically, they mentioned the fact that the tweet was made like around the time they were celebrating the fact that 11 years has passed since the finale. And then they released this tweet basically saying, hey, you can recap all of the events up until Boruto. In fact, this statement right here is actually the one that kind of piqued my interest. It says here, experience the story of Naruto in 1 to 4. Catch up with, that's the part. Catch up with Boruto in Road to Boruto. The part about catching up is definitely interesting. It's an interesting statement to make. And then there's also enjoy a condensed version, whatever. Yeah, the part about catching up is interesting because like catching up is an interesting way to phrase this, because if they wanted to promote this to people that are consuming the Boruto anime, then the story that Road to Boruto adapts is pretty old. The anime has already adapted like a long time ago, and they've already been adapting arcs that came out after that. And so a part of me does wonder if for them to say catch up to this material makes me wonder if perhaps they intend to release more Boruto story material, and they just want you to catch up to the Road to Boruto content, which was the Chunin exams, I believe. But obviously, this is me just kind of like deciphering the meaning of this wording, which again is just speculation, doesn't really mean a whole lot in of itself. But again, it's just me entertaining thoughts. It's just me like entertaining ideas for what this could mean. And beyond that, I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the fact that this series lineup doesn't include Generations and Revolution, as well as like the PS2 games. Now, obviously, the reason why it doesn't include those things is because those games haven't really been ported to modern platforms, and so they have no reason to promote those. But I guess a better question here is why they haven't done that. Now, I did mention the fact that, again, Generations and Revolution, those two games, like, obviously, the Storm community, I think a lot of us, especially Generations, because Revolution is on PC. You can play that on PC. It's fine. The only thing that we would ask for is like a 60 FPS patch, and maybe like upgrade the textures, because that game was like as far as like I remember, I don't think it has like very high resolution textures as far as I'm aware. But regardless, Generations is the one game that's like not really available on any modern platform, and so that would definitely be the one that people would really want. But again, like those two games, like even Storm 1, which I think does a pretty lackluster job adapting part 1 of Naruto, it does still technically do that to some degree. Like we do get cutscenes from certain events in part 1, and so for Bandai Namco, they can more easily promote that. Like they can more easily use that to their advantage as far as like marketing the series. Like I think it's just generally a lot easier to say, hey, play Storm from 1 up to 4, like the numerical series. People, if they want to consume the Naruto material based on the manga storyline, they can more easily categorize those. Like they even do it here. Like we see here like Naruto as in part 1, and then here up to the Pain arc, then here up to like the fourth grade Ninja War part 1. Like it's very easy for them to promote this. That's why they can continue to justify like promoting this and porting to newer platforms, because these games generally, they're just a lot easier to market. Meanwhile, Generations and Revolution, they are like from a story perspective, they are, sort of like not spin-off, but like they're side games. They're not really like none of these games really adapt any like Naruto manga material necessarily, like, and so I don't know. Maybe Bandai Namco just doesn't really think it's really all that worth it to promote these games. And as for the PS2 games, honestly, for those ones, I wouldn't really be able to tell you what's going on inside their minds. Like, even if I wanted to make the argument that they're too old, it's like we have like the old Mortal Kombat games getting ported to newer consoles, and so I don't know. If that's the reason why, it's certainly odd. Like I maybe they just don't think there's enough demand for it. That could also be possible. Like I don't know if there's any licensing shenanigans that could prevent them. I don't think so, because if that were the case, then Storm 1 wouldn't be ported to newer consoles, even though Storm 1 initially was was a PlayStation exclusive game, so I don't know if exclusivity was a problem. I don't think it's a problem, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know. I think it's just a similar situation in which they just don't really think it's worth it. And I personally, I think it would be interesting to port those games to newer platforms. If they were to do that, I would certainly be down for it. But do I think that's gonna happen? I don't know. Like it's a bit of a it's hard to say, but I will certainly say that I don't expect something like that to happen. And I also don't expect these games to be highly promoted on the website because they're not even being sold. And if they're not getting sold, I don't think they're going to care to highlight this in the website, which, it's a bit of a shame, but like that's just how business works, I guess. Now, beyond that, yeah, I think that's really all I have to share. I just kind of wanted to share a follow up because I firstly because just because I wanted to kind of clear up that, like, despite me sniffing the hopium, I do still have a realistic side of me that says that, like, we there's really no evidence that there's really anything happening, and so I am just sniffing hopium here. I'm just coping. That's all it really is. I don't want to like give like false expectations to people. I don't want people to believe, oh, we're definitely gonna get like new Storm content. There's no evidence of that being the case. This is just me entertaining that possibility, and beyond that, I don't know if there are any leaks that might confirm or not confirm, because I know these events tend to have like people supposedly insider information about it. I don't know if that exists. I'll check later to see if that might be the case. But anyway, yeah, that's all I really wanted to share. Also, I know because this all of this started happening around the time when people were talking about Storm 4 Evolution, which is like a mod pack for Storm 4 that the community kind of made. And that was certainly funny timing. I don't know if I'll ever really talk about Storm 4 Evolution because I've been aware of it for a long time, but um I haven't really gone into it for a lot of reasons. Maybe one day I'll share my own thoughts on it, but regardless, it's worth checking out. If you're still someone who plays Storm 4, you might as well check that out because it might be something of your interest. But in the meantime, I'll just continue sniffing the hopium. And yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to share. And goodbye.